Do you know how many women become a man's unfinished dream? More than you think? Not because they wanted to be, but because they refused to become the chapter he could close. Some women leave an imprint so deep, it's not just about memory, it's about the unconscious. They become woven into a man's psyche like a recurring symbol, like a dream he can't wake from or finish writing. Carl Jung understood this better than most. He knew that what the male ego labels as regret or obsession is often much deeper. It is projection entangled with longing, a mirror he cannot break, and an emotional scar that keeps whispering, "You left something undone." This is the woman who lives in his unfinished dreams. She is not the woman he dated for years and got over. She's not the one who fit neatly into the life plan. She's the one who showed up like fate, stayed just long enough to fracture his sense of self, and then disappeared, physically or emotionally, before his ego could box her into control. And now, even when he sleeps, she is there. Not because she wants to haunt him, but because he made her into a symbol. When Carl Jung spoke of the anima, he wasn't talking about just the feminine. He was talking about the part of a man's unconscious that holds the keys to his depth, his vulnerability, his spiritual hunger. But most men don't know how to meet the anima consciously, so they project her onto a real woman, mistaking her for the answer to their incomplete self. And when she leaves, or when life forces him to let her go, he is left with a wound that feels like obsession, but is really a calling to integrate the part of himself he tried to find in her. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever felt like you were the woman he could never finish loving? Not because he loved you too much, but because he loved you as a reflection of his unconscious? You'll know it by the way he lingers in silence, by the messages left unsent, by the way he watches from afar years later, never quite able to close the door. It's not about romance anymore. It's about archetype, about soul work. When a woman touches the symbolic realm of a man's psyche, she does not become just the ex or the one that got away. She becomes his private myth, the ghost in his mirror, the melody he plays in his mind when the lights go out. Carl Jung would tell you that this isn't necessarily about love. It's about psychic integration, about the parts of himself he refuses to face directly. The woman in his dreams represents his own vulnerability, his own unclaimed emotional territory, his own shadowed softness that terrifies him more than he'll admit. Because if he finishes the dream, he has to wake up. He has to deal with himself. And most men aren't ready for that. So they let her live in the dream instead, in the unfinished places, in the emotional twilight where memory and desire collide but never resolve. This is why some women feel like they carry the weight of men's projections long after the relationship is over. It's not because they did something wrong, it's because they activated something he wasn't ready to integrate. They became the anima trigger, the spark that forced his unconscious to open its door, just a crack. And now, every time he tries to sleep, she's there, in the back of his mind, in the corner of his memory, not as herself, but as the symbol he made her into. If you are this woman, you need to know something important. It is not your job to finish his dream for him. It is not your job to soften the blow of his unprocessed depth. It is not your role to be the balm for his unclaimed soul work. You were the mirror. You were the spark. You were the moment that revealed a part of him he had hidden, even from himself. And that is enough. Because the woman who lives in a man's unfinished dreams isn't stuck. She's free. She belongs to herself, not to the echo of his longing. Some women spend their whole lives trying to escape this role, believing they need to return to apologize to make the man whole again. But this is a trap woven by the collective unconscious, a pattern older than memory itself. Carl Jung called it participation mystique, when two souls entangle not as autonomous beings, but as projections of each other's unmet needs. In this dynamic, a man does not see the woman for who she is. He sees her as the embodiment of everything he has repressed, denied, or longed for in silence. That's why when she leaves, by choice or by force, he feels not just heartbreak, but dismemberment. It's as if a part of him is torn away, but the truth is it was never hers to begin with. He projected his anima onto her because facing his own vulnerability was too terrifying. She became the placeholder for his inner work, the muse of his fantasy, the canvas for his unlived life, and now, without her, he is left staring into the abyss of his own spiritual vacancy. This is the obsession Jung warned about. Not the soft, poetic kind romanticized in love stories, but the raw, unhealed hunger that comes from emotional incompleteness. A hunger so deep it echoes through dreams, through sleepless nights, through the quiet ache of longing that cannot be confessed aloud. And yet, there's beauty in this pain, there's alchemy in this shadow. Because obsession, when observed consciously, is a portal. It forces the man to ask, what part of me did I abandon when I fell in love with her? What self did I neglect when I made her my symbol? The woman who lives in his unfinished dreams is not a curse, she is a catalyst. She is the mythic doorway into his own inner feminine, his anima, the neglected emotional intelligence he buried beneath layers of ego, achievement, and social performance. But here's the secret. Most men will avoid this integration. They will choose obsession over transformation. They will replay the memory of her over and over rather than risk becoming whole without her. Because to become whole would mean letting go of the comfort of longing. Longing allows him to stay incomplete, to avoid the risk of self-confrontation, to keep desire alive without ever facing the responsibility of his own emotional depth. And so he chooses the dream. He keeps her there, safely lodged between sleep and waking life. He replays the moments that never resolved, the conversations that ended too soon, the touch he never fully understood. This is his liminal space, a sacred purgatory between who he is and who he could become. But if you are the woman in this story, understand this. You are not his unfinished business. You are not a chapter left incomplete. You are a mirror he used to see himself more clearly. Do not shrink because he could not finish the dream. Do not carry guilt because he wasn't ready for the lesson. You were the lesson. Your detachment is the medicine he resists. Your absence is the invitation he avoids. And your wholeness, your refusal to become his emotional caretaker, is what forces him to look inward, to meet the parts of himself he projected onto you. Jung taught that life after love is where real individuation begins. When the illusion of romantic rescue dissolves, when the projections fall away, and when the ego is forced to reckon with itself, this is where the alchemical work starts. For the man, it is a dangerous awakening. For the woman, it is freedom. But freedom requires you to let go of his process, to stop carrying his unfinished narrative, to stop returning in spirit just because he dreams of you. He must walk his own path now. And if he never chooses to integrate his shadow, if he chooses to keep you locked in the echo chamber of his mind, that is his fate, not yours. Your fate is to live fully beyond the projection, beyond the symbol, beyond the ghost of his longing, because you are not the woman in his dream. You are the woman who woke up. There's something haunting about being remembered as a symbol instead of a person. The woman who lives in his unfinished dreams is not remembered for her reality, but for the version of her that his unconscious mind carved out. He doesn't remember her boundaries, her silence, her moments of indifference. He remembers the parts that serve his narrative, the softness, the spark, the moments of emotional intensity he could not replicate with anyone else. In Jungian terms, she becomes the archetype of the eternal feminine, but distorted. She becomes less human and more myth, less a partner, more a phantom. And phantoms by nature are never resolved. This is why obsession festers long after romance dies, because romance can end. Obsession cannot unless the dreamer is willing to wake up. Most men don't wake up. Instead, they turn her into the melody they replay at midnight. They transform her into the spiritual echo of what if. What if I had chosen differently? What if I had said the right thing? What if I had loved her better before she walked away? But the truth is, it's not really about her anymore. It's about the gap between who he is and who he was too afraid to become when she was still close enough to touch. Carl Jung knew that the male ego resists the collapse of certainty. Losing her, this kind of woman, forces him into a confrontation with the unknown. It's not just about missing her body, her presence, or her words. It's about the terrifying awareness that he projected an entire universe onto her, his salvation, his completion, his anima, And now he has no choice but to reclaim it from her absence. If a man dares to look at this pain consciously, he will see the real assignment: integration. Not getting her back, not recreating the past, not replacing her with another fantasy, but integrating the part of himself he tried to outsource, the tenderness he hid behind stoicism, the vulnerability he masked with control, the hunger for connection that terrified him into silence. This is why some women are never forgotten, not because they were perfect, but because they forced a man to feel something he could not categorize. They activated his spiritual longing, his subconscious desire for wholeness, his secret craving to be seen, raw and unarmored. But that kind of seeing is dangerous, because when a woman sees into a man's soul without trying to possess it, without trying to fix him or soften the truth, she leaves him with a mirror he cannot shatter. He can walk away from her physically. He can ghost her. He can replace her with distraction, with noise, with other women who play by the ego's rules, but he cannot walk away from what she triggered in his psyche. She touched his shadow. She revealed the gap between his outer life and his inner truth. And the only way to silence that echo is to do the work of integration. But integration is not romantic. It's not wrapped in poetic texts or grand gestures. It's brutal. It's lonely. It's sitting in the discomfort of realizing you used love to avoid meeting yourself. So most men don't do it. They stay asleep with their eyes open. They keep her in the dream because it's safer that way. Safer to fantasize than to face the terror of the void she left behind. And if you are the woman who lives in his unfinished dreams, this is your initiation too. You must resist the temptation to shrink. You must not fall into the trap of believing you owe him closure, softness, or emotional rescue. You were not meant to become his spiritual therapist. You were meant to be the woman who refuses to collapse into his projections. And this is not cruelty, it is mercy. Mercy for him because it forces him to wake up or stay restless. Mercy for you because it frees you from the role of caretaker of his unconscious. The woman who lives in his unfinished dreams does not belong to the dream, she belongs to herself. The most dangerous mistake a woman can make is believing she must resolve the dreams she didn't ask to be part of. But some women do. They feel the gravitational pull of his obsession, the late-night texts, the ghost of his longing, the quiet hints he drops into conversations months, even years later. And there's a part of her, conditioned by centuries of feminine sacrifice, that wonders if she should return, if she should smooth out the jagged edges of his regret, if she should explain away his discomfort so he can finally rest. But Carl Jung warned of this. He warned that to interfere with a man's projection is to rob him of his own alchemical process. You were never supposed to be his rescue mission. You were supposed to be his reflection, the reflection of everything he has refused to face. His unintegrated feminine energy, his disowned sensitivity, his fear of surrendering control. When he met you, he didn't just meet a woman, he met the part of himself he locked away. And when you walked away, you became the symbolic loss of that part. This is why he spirals into obsession, not because he lost you, but because he lost access to the version of himself that only existed when you were near. But here's the spiritual trap. He believes the solution is to get you back. If only she would return, he thinks, I could finally be whole again. This is a lie the ego tells to avoid transformation. Because if you came back, he would eventually project his shadow onto you again. He would find new reasons to feel restless, misunderstood, emotionally exiled, and the cycle would repeat. The real work is not in reunion, it's in inner union. For the man, this means facing the dissonance between his outer success and his inner emptiness. The cold realization that the life he built, the career, the roles, the control, has become a fortress that isolates him from his own soul. The woman who lives in his unfinished dreams is not just a lost love, she is the symbol of his emotional exile. She represents the self he abandoned to keep the world from seeing his weakness. And now in silence, in solitude, he must decide, will he keep chasing the woman or will he chase the part of himself she activated? Most men run from this crossroads. They distract themselves with new desires, new obsessions, new faces to project onto, but the wound remains. And at night, when the world quiets, the dream returns. Her silhouette in the doorway of his unconscious, her voice echoing through his mind, not as words, but as energy. The feeling of something unfinished. This is not just romantic failure, this is spiritual confrontation. Because to truly love is to allow the other person to leave your projections and to meet them, or let them go as they really are. Jung called this individuation, the path of becoming whole without depending on another to complete you. It is rare, it is brutal, and it is necessary. For the woman, individuation means refusing to become his emotional surrogate, refusing to let his longing define her worth, refusing to step back into the dream just because he keeps replaying it. Your life is not his unfinished story. Your purpose is not to soothe his restlessness. You are not here to soften his karmic lesson. You are here to stand in your own sovereignty, knowing that some men will never understand what you taught them until long after you're gone. And that's okay. Because healing does not require both people to arrive at the same moment of awakening. Sometimes the most sacred role you can play is to be the woman who leaves him with the mirror and walks away. He may never stop dreaming of you, but you are not his dream anymore. You are reality now, and reality does not apologize for being whole without him. There's a certain kind of man who cannot forget the woman who left him standing in the ruins of his own projections. Not because she wounded him, but because she revealed the fractures that were already there. Carl Jung wrote about this undercurrent of human suffering. The secret agony of unexamined lives. Men who craft outer empires but neglect the silent collapse of their inner world. By the time he reaches middle life, what Jung called the afternoon of existence, the cracks can no longer be ignored. The achievements, the roles, the socially acceptable masks begin to feel like heavy costumes, and then, without warning, a woman arrives. Not just any woman, a woman who disrupts the narrative. She doesn't play by the script he spent decades rehearsing. She doesn't mirror his ego back to him like others did. She stands at the doorway of his unconscious and refuses to be possessed. And for a man who has built his identity on control, this is unbearable. She doesn't try to fix him. She doesn't chase him. She becomes the wound and the medicine at the same time. He obsesses, not because she played games, but because she became the mirror of his unlived life. The woman who lives in his unfinished dreams is not the woman he lost. She is the woman who exposes the parts of himself he never dared to meet. This is why his mind replays the moments. The look in her eyes when she chose silence over validation, the way she loved him without collapsing into him, the terrifying grace with which she let him go. And now he's trapped not by her, but by his refusal to evolve. Jung called this the midlife crisis, but it's deeper than sports cars and impulsive decisions. It's a spiritual crisis, a moment when the ego can no longer sustain the illusion that life is about winning, possessing, or conquering. The woman he obsesses over is not his unfinished love story. She is the catalyst for his metamorphosis. But here's the tragedy. Most men don't realize this until it's too late. They chase substitutes. They search for replicas. They seduce new partners hoping to reawaken the spark, only to find the same emptiness waiting on the other side. Because no external woman can complete a man who refuses to meet his inner feminine. In Jungian terms, the anima, the feminine aspect of the male psyche, demands attention at midlife. If ignored, she rebels. She becomes restless desire, uncontrollable longing, emotional obsession. She becomes her. The woman who left, the woman he can't forget, the woman who lives in his unfinished dreams. And here's the part no one tells you. That woman often walks away knowing she will be remembered this way. She understands that her departure will hurt him more than her presence ever did. But she also knows she cannot stay. Because if she stays, she becomes part of his avoidance pattern. If she stays, she becomes the emotional caretaker of his ego. And the woman who has done her own shadow work refuses to play that role. She chooses solitude over self-betrayal. She chooses silence over explaining her worth. She chooses mystery over compliance. And in doing so, she becomes unforgettable. Not because she tried to be, but because she honored her own evolution more than his comfort. For the man, this is the moment of reckoning. Will he see her as a ghost he can't exorcise, or will he recognize her as the symbol of the work he must do? Will he project his longing outward, or will he turn inward and ask the dangerous question, what part of me did she awaken that I'm too afraid to face? This is where true healing begins. Not in reunion, not in revenge, not in regret, but in the alchemy of self-confrontation. And for the woman, the lesson is this: you are allowed to leave his story unfinished. You are allowed to choose your own wholeness over his unresolved longing. You are allowed to be the chapter he never closes and never controls. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away and let the mirror remain. Most women don't realize the spiritual power they hold when they refuse to become the solution to a man's inner chaos. But some women do. Some women understand that staying would only serve his stagnation, not his transformation. They know the difference between love and rescue, between intimacy and emotional babysitting, between connection and codependency masked as romance. This is the wisdom that Carl Jung left buried in his writings, scattered between symbols, archetypes, and alchemical metaphors. He knew the male psyche tends to project the anima, the deep, feminine unconscious, onto real women, turning them into objects of obsession rather than partners in evolution. This is not love, this is possession disguised as longing. And when a woman refuses to play the role of his psychological crutch, she triggers something ancient in him, the terror of emotional homelessness. For most of his life, he kept the world at arm's length. He built castles of logic, walls of status, fortresses of detachment. He mastered the art of being untouchable. But she touched something he didn't know existed. The unfinished dream, the memory of emotional intimacy he never allowed himself to experience fully. And now her absence is louder than her presence ever was. This is not by accident. It's the design of archetypal awakening. When the anima withdraws, when the projected feminine leaves, the man is forced to face his own emptiness. His sleepless nights are not about her body. They are about the parts of himself that remained dormant until she entered his life. He wonders, was it love or was it something else? It was both and neither. She became the symbol of his inner split, the fracture between his ego and his soul, the gap between who he pretends to be and who he really is when no one is watching. And this is why obsession replaces romance. Because if he admits the truth, he'll have to dismantle the very identity he spent decades building. This is not just about women and men, it's about human evolution. Every soul must eventually face its own contradictions. The ego wants control, the soul wants surrender. The ego wants to possess, the soul wants to integrate. The ego seeks comfort, the soul craves transformation. And sometimes transformation requires loss. He must lose the idea of her to find the real version of himself. But many men resist this process. They choose distraction. They romanticize the woman who left instead of facing why she had to leave. They rewrite the story in their minds, turning her into an unsolvable puzzle, an emotional siren, a dangerous enchantress who refuses to give closure. But here's the secret. Closure is not given. It is earned through self-confrontation. The woman who lives in his unfinished dreams is not cruel. She is not withholding. She is not manipulative. She is sovereign. She chooses her wholeness over his desire to keep her trapped in his unresolved narrative. And you, the woman watching this, might be tempted to go back, to explain, to soften the sharpness of your departure, to offer him a way out of his restlessness. But ask yourself, who would you be rescuing? Him or your own discomfort with being misunderstood? True feminine power is not about being liked or even understood. It is about being aligned with your deepest self, no matter how much noise surrounds you. You are not obligated to complete his story. You are not responsible for his emotional, unfinished business. You are not the missing piece to his puzzle. You are the mirror. You are the lesson. You are the reflection of the work he refuses to do. And that is why he dreams of you. Not because you were perfect, not because you belong to him, but because you triggered the part of his soul that can no longer be silenced. So let him dream. Let him remember you not as the woman who stayed to heal him, but as the woman who left him with the courage to heal himself. Most women don't realize the spiritual power they hold when they refuse to become the solution to a man's inner chaos. But some women do. Some women understand that staying would only serve his stagnation, not his transformation. They know the difference between love and rescue, between intimacy and emotional babysitting, between connection and codependency masked as romance. This is the wisdom that Carl Jung left buried in his writings, scattered between symbols, archetypes, and alchemical metaphors. He knew the male psyche tends to project the anima, the deep, feminine unconscious, onto real women, turning them into objects of obsession rather than partners in evolution. This is not love, this is possession disguised as longing. And when a woman refuses to play the role of his psychological crutch, she triggers something ancient in him, the terror of emotional homelessness. For most of his life, he kept the world at arm's length. He built castles of logic, walls of status, fortresses of detachment. He mastered the art of being untouchable. But she touched something he didn't know existed. The unfinished dream, the memory of emotional intimacy he never allowed himself to experience fully, and now her absence is louder than her presence ever was. This is not by accident, it's the design of archetypal awakening. When the anima withdraws, when the projected feminine leaves, the man is forced to face his own emptiness. His sleepless nights are not about her body. They are about the parts of himself that remained dormant until she entered his life. He wonders, was it love or was it something else? It was both and neither. She became the symbol of his inner split, the fracture between his ego and his soul, the gap between who he pretends to be and who he really is when no one is watching. And this is why obsession replaces romance. Because if he admits the truth, he'll have to dismantle the very identity he spent decades building. This is not just about women and men, it's about human evolution. Every soul must eventually face its own contradictions. The ego wants control, the soul wants surrender, the ego wants to possess, the soul wants to integrate, the ego seeks comfort, the soul craves transformation. And sometimes transformation requires loss. He must lose the idea of her to find the real version of himself. But many men resist this process. They choose distraction, they romanticize the woman who left instead of facing why she had to leave. They rewrite the story in their minds, turning her into an unsolvable puzzle, an emotional siren, a dangerous enchantress who refuses to give closure. But here's the secret. Closure is not given. It is earned through self-confrontation. The woman who lives in his unfinished dreams is not cruel. She is not withholding. She is not manipulative. She is sovereign. She chooses her wholeness over his desire to keep her trapped in his unresolved narrative. And you, the woman watching this, might be tempted to go back, to explain, to soften the sharpness of your departure, to offer him a way out of his restlessness. But ask yourself, who would you be rescuing? Him? Or your own discomfort with being misunderstood? True feminine power is not about being liked or even understood. It is about being aligned with your deepest self, no matter how much noise surrounds you. You are not obligated to complete his story. You are not responsible for his emotional, unfinished business. You are not the missing piece to his puzzle. You are the mirror. You are the lesson. You are the reflection of the work he refuses to do. And that is why he dreams of you. Not because you were perfect, not because you belonged to him, but because you triggered the part of his soul that can no longer be silenced. So let him dream. Let him remember you not as the woman who stayed to heal him, but as the woman who left him with the courage to heal himself. Some women do not realize the alchemy they create when they walk away, others do. The woman who lives in his unfinished dreams is not just a person, she is an archetype, a living symbol of everything his soul yearns for, but his ego resists. She becomes the bridge between his outer life of achievement and his inner life of longing. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the integration of the conscious and unconscious, the union of the masculine and feminine within the self. But most men never cross that bridge. They get stuck, obsessed, haunted, not because they are weak, but because they are human, and because the ego does not surrender easily. He thought he wanted love. What he really wanted was comfort. He thought he was ready for intimacy. What he was actually ready for was validation. He thought she would complete him, but she refused to play that role. And so now, he cannot sleep. His mind circles back to the moment she left, the look in her eyes, the silence in the room when the door closed. His dreams become reruns of conversations he wishes he could redo, versions of the story where he chooses differently, speaks more vulnerably, listens more deeply. But there is no rewind button in real life, only regret. And here's the deeper truth. This regret is not entirely about her, it's about what she represented. She was the mirror. She reflected his emotional immaturity, his avoidance, his need for control disguised as love. She exposed the difference between romance and obsession, between possession and partnership. This is why she haunts his subconscious, not as a villain, not as a saint, but as a symbol of the work he left undone. And you, the woman listening to this, might carry guilt for being that symbol. Society teaches you to soften your boundaries, to ease his suffering, to return when he spirals. But understand this, his suffering is not punishment. It is initiation. Carl Jung wrote that no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. For some men, the hell they must face is the realization that they were never truly intimate. Not with her, not with themselves. They performed affection while keeping their souls locked in vaults. They mimicked connection while protecting their egos at all costs. But when she left, the vault cracked open, and now he's left with the raw materials of transformation: grief, longing, humility, self-reflection. Whether he turns these into growth or further obsession is his choice. The woman's role is not to manage that choice, it is to honor her own evolution. Because here's the paradox. The more she aligns with her own wholeness, the more he feels her absence in his unfinished dreams, and the more he feels it, the more opportunities life gives him to awaken. But awakening is brutal. It means facing the shadow, the parts of himself he disowned because they threatened his sense of control. It means dismantling the armor he built to survive childhood wounds, societal expectations, and masculine posturing. It means admitting that he loved her not because she was perfect, but because she illuminated his flaws. Some men will resent this, others will romanticize it, a rare few will do the work. And what about you? You are not here to be his lesson forever. You are here to live your own myth, to continue walking forward, knowing that your detachment is not coldness, it is sacred clarity. Do not minimize your role as a catalyst just because it makes others uncomfortable. Do not shrink to fit the narratives of women who stay out of guilt or fear. Do not apologize for being the mirror that reveals his unfinished growth. There is a silent kind of love that says, I will not betray my own soul to soothe yours. And that love is fierce. It is the love that births transformation, not codependency. It is the love that respects the other person's capacity for evolution, even if it means letting them fall, spiral, ache, and rebuild alone. So if he dreams of you tonight, let him. If he wakes up restless, let him. If he obsesses over the version of you that lives in his memory, let him. His dreams are not about you. They are about his own awakening, and you, the woman who chose herself, are free. Some women are chapters, others are entire mythologies. The woman who lives in his unfinished dreams is not a character he can edit or rewrite. She is an archetype engraved into his unconscious, a symbol of the anima, the feminine soul image that every man carries but few integrate. Carl Jung warned of this, that when a man represses his inner feminine, she returns not as peace, but as obsession, not as comfort, but as compulsion. She becomes the echo that never silences, the memory that does not fade, the ghost he both desires and fears. Because she represents what he abandoned in himself: vulnerability, receptivity, emotional depth. And now she shows up in his mind like a melody he cannot forget, playing on loop while he pretends to sleep. By day, he may distract himself. He might chase newer pleasures, dive into his career, build another empire, seduce another body. But at night, when the distractions dissolve, the shadow rises. The silence becomes deafening. And in that silence, she waits. She is not waiting for him to return. She is not waiting for him to apologize. She is not waiting at all. She is simply present in his psyche, in his dreams, in his regrets, not as punishment, but as initiation. If a man is brave enough, he will face this apparition not with denial, but with surrender. He will ask, what part of myself did I abandon to keep my ego safe? What part of love did I reject because it required my transformation? But most men will not ask these questions. They will loop endlessly, projecting the fantasy of her onto new women, trying to replace the irreplaceable, mistaking longing for love, mistaking obsession for destiny. That's why Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. For the woman, this knowledge is liberation. It frees her from the cultural script that says she must be nurturing to the point of self-erasure, that she must soften every sharp edge to accommodate a man's unprocessed wounds. No, she is not responsible for his lack of integration. She is not responsible for the nights he cannot sleep. She is not responsible for the ache he carries in her absence. She is responsible for her own evolution. And here's the paradox. The more she evolves, the more powerful her presence becomes in his psyche, because she represents the part of life he cannot conquer, cannot own, cannot control. She is his unfinished story, his unsolved equation, his sacred interruption. This is why men write songs about women they cannot forget. This is why they stare into the dark after the breakup, wondering if they made a mistake, not because of who she was in daily life, but because of what she triggered in their soul. Obsession is the child of avoidance. When a man avoids his inner work, the woman who leaves becomes his scapegoat and his symbol. But when a man chooses to face himself, she becomes his guide, not in real life, but in his unconscious, where true transformation happens. And for you, the woman listening, this should not make you afraid of being remembered. It should make you intentional about how you show up. Be the woman who does not compromise her integrity for comfort. Be the woman who refuses to perform softness just to be liked. Be the woman who understands that love without self-respect is not love, it is emotional servitude. Because when you live from this place, you naturally become unforgettable. Not because you play games, not because you manipulate, but because you embody the rare kind of energy that men do not meet every day. You become the mirror that forces them to see themselves, not just their charm or their power, but their gaps, their wounds, their unclaimed shadows. Some will resent you for this. Others will romanticize you. A few will grow because of you. But regardless of their response, you remain whole. You are not a dream in his head. You are reality in your own life. So let him think of you. Let him wonder. Let him reconstruct the memory of you in his mind, adding layers of mystique, of regret, of longing. That is his journey. Your journey is to keep becoming. There's a sacred cruelty in growth. Not the cruelty of malice, but the cruelty of necessity. The harsh truth that evolution requires leaving some people behind, even when you still care for them. The woman who lives in his unfinished dreams carries this sacred cruelty like an invisible crown. She did not choose to be his obsession. She chose to be her own liberation. But in doing so, she triggered a ripple effect in his unconscious that no apology, no closure conversation, no romantic reunion could ever resolve. Because what she activated wasn't just his love, it was his shadow. Carl Jung taught that the shadow isn't only darkness. Sometimes the shadow is gold, untapped potential, unlived dreams, neglected emotional capacities. But gold in the shadow feels like torment when you don't know how to access it. It gnaws at you, restless, unresolved. That's why he dreams of her. That's why he obsesses. He doesn't miss her because she was perfect. He misses her because she represented the version of himself he was too afraid to become. He may never admit this out loud. He may never say, I lost her because I refused to face myself. Instead, he'll cloak it in other stories. She was too much. She was too distant. She didn't understand me. But late at night, when the mask of bravado slips, the truth whispers through his insomnia. She asked me to evolve, and I chose comfort instead. And so now he relives the moments, the times he pulled away when he should have leaned in, the times he chose ego over intimacy, silence over vulnerability. His body goes through the motions of daily life, but his spirit remains tethered to the unresolved. Because here's what most people don't understand. Obsession is not about the other person. It's about the parts of the self you refuse to meet And no distraction, no new lover, no career milestone, no self-help podcast can substitute for that reckoning. Some men will stay trapped in this loop until the end of their lives, projecting their longing onto other women, confusing fantasy with love, chasing shadows instead of facing their own. But others, rare others, will use the loss as a catalyst. They will finally step into the dark mirror she held up and say, enough. They will stop outsourcing their wholeness. They will stop demanding that a woman complete them. They will start the brutal, beautiful work of individuation. For them, she remains in the dream not as a torment, but as a guide, a compass pointing toward the self they left behind. And for her, the woman who walked away, the woman who chose herself, there is nothing left to do but continue rising. Because here's the quiet truth no one tells you. When you stop betraying yourself to keep others comfortable, you become unforgettable. Not because you manipulated anyone, but because you embodied a level of spiritual detachment they didn't know how to handle. You didn't abandon them, you stopped abandoning yourself. And in doing so, you shattered their illusion of control. You reminded them that love is not ownership. You reminded them that connection without respect is exploitation. You reminded them that no woman exists to be a man's emotional crutch. This is why you live in his unfinished dreams, not as a mistake, not as a villain, but as a mythic figure his soul cannot release. And that's okay. You were never meant to be his finish line. You were meant to be his wake-up call. Some men will answer that call, others won't. That is not your burden. Your only task is to keep becoming the woman you were always meant to be, the woman who walks her own path, regardless of who is watching, regardless of who is chasing, regardless of who is still trapped in last year's dream. Because you know now, you were never here to be conquered. You were here to be free. And the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.